Sorry about that. I think we're in good shape now. I thought maybe we had a battery malfunction. I got my backups now, just in case. So good morning. It's good to see everyone. Glad that you're here for sure. We have something new that's going on in Israel. Up to this point, we've only had males ruling over Israel. Is this the point of a great societal breakthrough for God's country? Is it going to be a good thing, and should it be a time for celebration because we have our first female sitting on the throne of God's people? We'll try to figure out whether that's the case. We'll use the information from 2 Kings chapter 11. So if you'd like to turn there, that'd be great if you're not already at the spot. 2 Kings 11, we're going to be covering these 21 verses where Athaliah is reigning. And I say in Israel, Israel big. Technically, it's over the southern kingdom, which is in Judah, but, God's people in general, Israel. Now, we're in this section on the swords. There's a 5-chapter section, and we're dealing with the swords of retribution. God's meting out some judgment that's deserved around in His countries, plural, both in the north as well as in the south. We've had the sword of Jehu the last couple of class periods, and Jehu, well, what's he as far as society goes? He lives by the sword, doesn't he? Yeah. Remember Jesus warning. You want to live by the sword? Eventually that sword's probably going to come back to you at some point. And he's serving in what cultural role among God's people at this point? Excellent, Justin. He is king over, there you go, good. Israel. Right, up in the north, he's ruling over Israel. He's assumed the throne through rebellion, and he took out the sitting king, all right? And so now he's in charge, and this was prophesied going back to Elijah. Now, Elisha has something to say about it also, but it goes well back to Elijah, and he foretold there's going to be this guy named Jehu who's going to assume the throne. The prophet was to anoint him, and so this prophecy of God has been fulfilled. Well, today in chapter 11, we're going to be focusing on the sword of Jehoiada. Jehoiada. And this guy is not a king. Good guy, though. So, verse 1, we're going to spend a little bit of time on this. We're going to have a cross-reference. So if you want, you might go ahead and prepare to mark your spot here, unless you just want to turn back and forth. That's great. But I want to go over to look at some helpful information that's going to supplement us in what we read in verse 1. When Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead. This is the guy who was ruling as king in Judah. Now her son has... I can test those. Cuts in and out. I think we'll be good now. All right, so 2 Kings 9, 27 and 28. Let me catch up to you. When Ahaziah, the king of Judah, saw this, he fled in the direction of Beth-Hagan, and Jehu pursued him and said, "Shoot him also." Now, if you look back in the chapter previously, this is when he's already killed the sitting king of Israel, who is Joram or Jehoram, and he assumes the throne. Well, now he's chasing after Ahaziah. Of course, the families have intermarried with one another. He says, "Shoot him also." And they shot him in the chariot at the ascent of Gur, which is by Iblim. And he fled to Megiddo, a very important place in the Bible, and died there. His servants carried him in a chariot to Jerusalem, and then they buried him in his tomb with his fathers in the city of David. So back in our place, a couple chapters later, when Athaliah, the mother of this guy right here, sees that her son is dead. She sees that he's dead because Jehu has killed him. He has killed Joram or Jehoram in the north. He's killed Ahaziah in the south. And just as a reminder, who has he also killed to pull off the trifecta? Queen bee of the hive. Yes, the wonderful, seemingly everlasting Queen Mother Jezebel. But it turns out she's not everlasting. She's not like the gobstoppers. Eventually she ends. And so she's been put to a close, and all of these have been killed. Well, Athaliah, so who is this chick exactly? I mentioned this at the end of our last class period. Does anybody recall, or just do you remember from your own studies previously, who's Ahaziah as far as family goes? There you go. She comes from the house of Ahab, which also means she comes from the house of Jezebel. And she's in now a very prominent role. There's been this queen mother concept in Israel for some time, and now she is going to be serving as the queen mother. But there's a problem on her hands, and that's that her son has died. And so she sees this as an opportunity. It's mentioned she arose and she destroyed all the royal heirs when she sees that her son has died. So if your child, God forbid, but if your child were to pass away, what would be your demeanor at that point, do you think? What would be your course of life? Yeah, it'd be awful. How could you even operate? Your whole world's torn apart. Not for her. She sees opportunity, it appears, when her child, her own son, dies. And so she gets up and she thinks the first thing I need to do is kill a whole bunch of people. Nobody thinks that way except for just a rotten human being. Where do you think she learned this? Ahab wasn't the best guy. Her mother really was not the best gal. And I do believe as we went through the story of Ahab, God's so patient with him. You see some glimmers of good character. I'm not saying he's a good character overall, but there are these little pieces, including pretty heartfelt repentance at one point. And I think God realizes that, but he keeps bringing in the influence that was in his house that kept dragging him down. And that's no excuse for him. He's making his own choices. But he did have a poor influence that he chose for himself. Yeah, I think she's probably learned it from there. So let's think about this. She goes on this killing spree of all the royal household. Time out. What connection is there in the royal household and this lady? Yeah, it's talking about the house of David. Good, but she's married into, don't forget, this house. And she, through marriage, has been a part of a ruling influence in this country. We're talking about some of her own descendants. I think it's very possible from the way it sounds that she kills a whole bunch of her own grandchildren. Now, some of those are probably step-grandchildren, in fairness, but some of them could very well be her own grandchildren that she kills immediately after her son dies because she's so concerned about this power-grabbing opportunity that's been placed in front of her. So I want to pause right here and go back and read some background. We're going to do this in chapter 8 of 2 Kings. So just one back from where we flipped a moment ago. 2 Kings chapter 8. And remember the statements that we find about Ahab. No, he's not a great guy of himself. But it's constantly mentioned for his wife. Jezebel is he might be the head of the home, but she's the neck, right? That's turning the head. Well, 2 Kings chapter 8, let's read a little bit more about Joram or Jehoram, the son of Ahab. Verse 16, in the 5th year of Joram or Jehoram, the son of Ahab, king of Israel, when Jehoshaphat was king of Judah, Jehoram, the son of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, began to reign. And remember how confusing it is because you'll have an Ahaziah in the north and Ahaziah in the south. A Jehoram in the north, a Jehoram in the south. What makes things really confusing is at one point you have a Joram or Jehoram in both, exactly at the same time. A lot of that has to do with these families intermarrying with one another, and the statement that's made from Jehoshaphat to Ahab, your family shall be as my family, or our families are one. They even start naming their kids the same names. So this Joram or Jehoram, who assumes the throne in the south, is married to Athaliah. That's the intermarriage of these families that takes place. He was 32 years old when he became king, and he reigned 8 years in Jerusalem. And he walked in the way of the kings of Israel. He's not a king of Israel. And Judah's done a pretty good job for the most part in differentiating and continuing to worship Yahweh when the golden calf worship is going on in the north, as well as the worship of Baal. It kind of comes in and out thanks to Jezebel and her family. They do a pretty good job until they start playing around with the kings of Israel and the monarchy itself. And the families become intertwined. They start doing the same things. he walked in the way of the kings of Israel as the house of Ahab had done. For the daughter of Ahab was his wife. Go figure. You start playing with fire, and eventually you and your people, when you're a leader of a country, get burned. And he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. Yet the Lord was not willing to destroy Judah, as he's going to Israel, for the sake of David his servant, since he promised to give a lamp to him and to his sons forever. Now, this is just kind of in a nutshell the way these 8 years in Jerusalem go, with Jehoram reigning as king when he has his evil influence in his wife Athaliah. I do want to turn over to 2 Chronicles. This is the parallel to this. 2 Chronicles, and as is often the case, there's a lot more detail that's found here. 2 Chronicles chapter 21 is where we'll be. And we'll start reading there in verse 1. 2 Chronicles 21:1. Jehoshaphat, who was the king of the south, a lot of good things with him, slept with his fathers and was buried with his fathers in the city of David. And Jehoram his son reigned in his place. Now this is the guy who's going to marry Jezebel's daughter, Athaliah. He had brothers, Jehoram did, the sons of Jehoshaphat, 6 of them that are listed here: Azariah, Jehiel, Zechariah, not the prophet, Azariah, Michael, and Shephatiah. All these were sons of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah. And so there are 7 sons. Jehoshaphat has the perfect number of sons that are found here. And in addition to Jehoram, you have these 6 guys who are listed. Their father treated them very well, maybe a little too well. He gave them great gifts of silver, gold, and valuable possessions, together with fortified cities in Judah. But he gave the kingdom to Jehoram because he was the firstborn. So Daddy Jehoshaphat's a very rich man, and he wants to share all these good blessings with his kids. And notice it doesn't mention anything that his kids earn, but he just gives. He gives and he gives and he gives. You've heard of being born with a silver spoon in your mouth? That actually happened with these. It just gives them silver and gives them gold. And, oh, you want land? Well, I'll give you land. And you want a kingdom? I'll give you a kingdom because you're the firstborn. A lot of times God doesn't operate that way in the Bible. He'll pick people depending on their fidelity to him, and a lot of times they're not the firstborn. Consider how well he treats Joseph, who's the 11th born in the family. And you have Jacob and Esau. Esau is the one who comes out first, but he picks Jacob instead. The promise in the 12 sons of Israel comes through what person? The Christ. The 4th born, who is Judah, passes over the first 3. You see this time and again with God, but he does it simply on the basis of birth. We'll just do it by the tradition of things. And so he gives all these things constantly to his kids, and unfortunately we don't have enough information to determine what the other 6 are like, but we do the firstborn. We know what he's like. Verse 4, he's just had a kingdom given to him. When Jehoram had ascended the throne of his father and was established, he killed all his brothers with the sword, also some of the princes of Israel. Now, can you imagine, as soon as you get the biggest gift that Dad's ever given to you, your first order of business is to eradicate your family, your blood relation. He murders in cold blood all 6 of his brothers, and that's not all. And then some princes, and we're not told, but understanding how a monarchy works, who do you think some of these princes might have been? Yeah, and what would make a lot of sense, or maybe quite a few of his nephews would add up to me. Can you imagine to kill all of your siblings, perhaps to kill all of their children as well? This guy's he's a nasty dude. So we continue on in verse 5. Jehoram was 32 years old when he became king, and he reigned 8 years in Jerusalem. And he walked in the way of the kings of Israel as the house of Ahab had done, for the daughter of Ahab, what's her name? Athaliah was his wife, and he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. And that's just the start of the nightmares for Israel. You know, if you got someone like this put into place and you realize, hey, you're going to have so many more years of this now. Look at how things went during his reign. Verse 8, in his days, Edom, that's the kingdom to the south, a little bit to the east, revolted from the rule of Judah and set up a king of their own. So they weakened in military prowess. Then Jehoram passed over with his commanders and all his chariots, and he rose by night and struck the Edomites who had surrounded him and his chariot commanders. So Edom revolted from the rule of Judah to this day. At that time, Libnah also revolted from his rule, losing their influence, because he had forsaken the Lord, the God of his fathers, religiously. Moreover, he made high places in the hill country of Judah. And he led the inhabitants of Jerusalem into whoredom and made Judah go astray. And a letter came to him from Elijah, remember it goes back to the first of the speaking prophets, saying, thus says the Lord, the God of your father David, because you have not walked in the ways of Jehoshaphat your father, or in the ways of Asa, king of Judah, but have walked in the way of the kings of Israel, and have enticed Judah and all the inhabitants of Jerusalem into whoredom, as the house of Ahab led Israel into whoredom, and also you have killed your brothers, murdered them, of your father's house, who were better than yourself. Ouch. That might be a little bit of a dig at Dad also. Maybe he shouldn't have chosen the next ruler on the basis of tradition. Maybe he should have looked at character before he selected the person to be in charge. Behold, the Lord will bring a great plague on your people. It's important that we choose the right kind of rulers in our nation. Now, in fairness to these people, I mean, how blessed are we that we have the opportunity to choose in our country? Many countries in the world, even to this day, but almost all of them back when, people did not get to choose who represented them and who would rule over them. But whenever there's an evil ruler in place, my point is, especially in a place where we have the choice who we want in place, we're wise to choose people of good character, or in the very least, people of good influence, and who will carry out what the Lord wants, because when evil is done by rulers, the people have to pay. But so did the rulers. Behold, the Lord will bring a great plague on your people that you're leading, your children, your wives, and all your possessions. And you yourself will have a severe sickness with the disease of your bowels, until your bowels come out because of the disease day by day. And it's unclear what exactly this disease is. It may have been some kind of digestive cancer. There are a few different possibilities. But he slowly loses his digestive tract day by day. And what appears to be a slow, painful death. Verse 16, and the Lord stirred up against Jehoram the anger of the Philistines and the Arabians who are near the Ethiopians. And they came up against Judah and invaded it and carried away all the possessions they found that belonged to the king's house, and also his sons and his wives, so that no son was left to him except Jehoahaz, his youngest son. And after all this, the Lord struck him in his bowels with an incurable disease. In the course of time, at the end of 2 years, his bowels came out because of the disease, and he died in great agony. So it's not just that he dies, but again, it's severe pain that he experiences. He just slowly expires over the course of 2 years as his insides dissolve. Now, what kind of a ruler was he? His people made no fire in his honor. That's rare. Typically, especially among God's people, you're at least going to provide some appreciation, some token of it. It would be like us saying that someone dies and there was no thought of a memorial service. And sometimes we choose not to have that. That's okay. But this is out of almost like disrespect, or to show how much this guy was appalled. They did not make a fire in his honor like the fires made for his fathers, previous kings. He was 32 years old when he began to reign. He reigned 8 years in Jerusalem, so he died when he was only 40 from his terrible disease because of his wickedness. And he departed with no one's regret. Not a single person in the world would miss him when he is gone. They buried him in the city of David, but not in the tomb of the kings. All right, so I wanted to read all of that so that we can go back to where we are in our main text in 2 Kings 11. Verse 1, when Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead, she arose and destroyed all the royal heirs. If you're thinking, what kind of a person does that? It's her family. That's all she's ever seen in her formative years. And so she's viewed this all this time. She's been married to this guy whose first act of business was, I'm going to kill all of my siblings and possibly all of my nephews, get rid of them all. That's what she's had. That's her husband at home. And it could be that she's this influence that causes him to do it, or it might just be that they're the perfect pair for one another. And they would both just act this way even apart from one another. So she does exactly what she's seen at home, what she's seen at home as well through her husband. Verse 2, we're told, but Jehosheba, the daughter of King Joram, sister of Ahaziah. Now, notice what's mentioned here. It's the daughter of King Joram or Jehoram. Athaliah was that guy's wife. He's dead now. Athaliah was his wife. It doesn't mention that this is the daughter of Athaliah. Remember, it's common for the kings to have a number of women to whom they're married, and maybe some to whom they're not also, and to have many children through them. And so it appears that this is probably a stepdaughter because of the wording. It's possible that it's the daughter, but it's probably a stepdaughter of Athaliah. But Jehosheba, the daughter of King Joram, the sister of Ahaziah, and we could say here the daughter, maybe stepdaughter of Athaliah, took Joash, the son of Ahaziah, and stole him away from among the king's sons who were being murdered, and they hid him and his nurse in the bedroom from Athaliah so that he was not killed. You want to talk about a messed up family? When you're the daughter of someone, or maybe even stepdaughter, and you know, I better take my infant brother and go hide him somewhere, and someone who can take care of him and bring him up because mom's going to kill him. If I don't, that's a crazy family, isn't it? I know a lot of times we think, my family's this. Okay, we all have our problems, right? Let's all count our blessings as we go home today also, that maybe, hopefully, we're not having to experience something like this. Just absolutely a mess. I hope you still have your place in 2 Chronicles 22. It's not going to be nearly as lengthy. I just want to read one verse. 2 Chronicles 22. And let's look at verse 11 for some supplemental information. 2 Chronicles 22:11. But Jehoshabeath, and that's the same as what we read. This is a parallel to it. There will be, slight alterations. Joseph, that kind of thing. So same thing here. It's the very person being discussed. The daughter of the king took Joash, the son of Ahaziah, and stole him away from among the king's sons who were about to put him to death, and she put him and his nurse in a bedroom. Thus Jehoshabeath, the daughter of King Jehoram, notice this, and wife of Jehoiada the priest. Okay, keep that in your mind for later on. So this daughter in the royal family, she's also married to a very prominent priest named Jehoiada. We're going to be talking about him. And there's a connection. She has a help for power. This guy is wielding a lot of influence in Israel over the whole period that Athaliah reigns as queen mother for 7 years. So she's also the wife of Jehoiada the priest, because she was a sister of Ahaziah, hidden from Athaliah, so that she did not put him to death. But that's an important connection to which we will come back. So in 2 Kings 11, this Jehosheba, which is very similar to the name in 2 Chronicles, just a little alteration in spelling. She takes away her brother, whether that's full-blooded or partly. She takes him and hides him away so crazy mama does not kill him also. He's the last one that remains. I find this fascinating. Does she not even know the kids? Nothing mentioned about, she really searches for him. She might not even know the number, might not even know the names, just kind of where they live. Or maybe she does, and he's tucked away, and she does look for him, and she can't find him, is a possibility also. But regardless, verse 3, so he was hidden with her, that is the nurse, in the house of the Lord for 6 years. Now, how do you think he could hide away in the house of the Lord and be undetected? There's the connection, right? This sister, perhaps stepsister, or half-sister, I should say, to Joash, is married to what prominent person? Jehoiada, we know, but what's his role in the kingdom? He's a priest. And so he rules over the house of God. He's well aware that this child is in this place. So they conspire together to save the life of this little innocent child who's the only remaining royal heir to the throne. Now remember, in the south, the promise that God has made, that someone is always going to be sitting on the throne from the house of what person? Of David. This is the way God fulfills his promise through this lady who's so brave, kind of like Moses' mother and sister in the attempt with him to save this innocent child. Turn, if you will, to 2 Chronicles 23. This is the last one, I believe, of these. 2 Chronicles chapter 23. In the 8th verse, the Levites and all Judah did according to all that Jehoiada and the priests commanded. Now notice, it's not just the Levites over whom he's in charge, but all Judah for 7 years. I know the Queen Mother is sitting on the throne right now, but a lot of people in the country look at somebody else as the real influence in the country. And if you're wondering, well, why wouldn't she just kill him like she does everybody else? I'm going to guess she's probably afraid to touch this guy because she knows the influence that he carries. And she probably thinks, I'm going to have an all-out rebellion. They'll kill me, and I'll lose all of my power. And so I'm going to say that she, kind of grinning and bearing it, lets the guy stick around, but she does not like him at all. The Levites and all Judah did all according to all that Jehoiada the priest commanded, and they each brought his men who were to go off duty on the Sabbath with those who were to come on duty on the Sabbath. For Jehoiada the priest did not dismiss the divisions. They hang on this guy's every word. They follow his leadership. And that's going to be important as we move forward in 2 Kings 11 in the 4th verse. Before we do, though, just to set a little time frame, it's been a while since I've updated. We went backtracked a little. We'd stopped at about 850 BC. There's not a lot of expiration of time here. Athaliah reigns for this 7-year span, and 841 to 835 BC. So we're just about a decade and a half fast forwarding from where we were prior. 841 to 835 BC. If you're wondering about the 7 years I mentioned, well, here it only says 6 years. Hang on just a sec. So he was hidden with her in the house of the Lord for 6 years. Notice in verse 4, in the 7th year, so she reigns for 7 years. He's hidden, the boy is, for 6 years. So guess what that means on the 7th year? It's time to present a present to Israel, Judah more specifically. And the present is a new king, and one with proper blood ties for the throne. So in verse number 4, in the 7th year of Athaliah's awful leadership, Jehoiada the priest, who the people all respect, not just the Levites, but all Judah, they listen to him, and they do what he says. He sent and brought the captains of hundreds of the bodyguards and the escorts, and brought them into the house of the Lord to him. And he made a covenant with them, and took an oath from them in the house of the Lord, and showed them the king's son. Then he said to them, or commanded them, saying, this is what you shall do. 1/3 of you who come on duty on the Sabbath shall be keeping watch over the king's house. 1/3 shall be at the gate of Sur, and 1/3 at the gate behind the escorts. You shall keep the watch of the house, lest it be broken down. It kind of makes me think, was it Samuel Adams, one of our founding fathers, who said, we hang together, or we shall most certainly be hanged separate. When you're involved in something like this, you're either all in or it's not going to work. If there's one little chink in the armor, one piece of information that gets out when it should not. And so they make this agreement with one another, and he makes them all swear by the name of the Lord that we will not back out of this, because otherwise we're done for if we don't. But this is our one hope for our country. Verse 7, the contingents of 2 who go off duty on the Sabbath shall keep the watch of the house of the Lord for the king. But you shall surround the king on all sides, every man with his weapons in his hand. And whoever comes within range, let him be put to death. You are to be with the king as he goes out and as he comes in. This is the lone remaining survivor. And whenever he's taken in, he needs a nurse. And, we're talking about he's still drinking milk. I mean, he had to have been maybe a little more than a baby, or possibly even just a baby when he was taken out. And how many years have expired since he was taken and hidden? Okay, 6 years. So if he's 1, that puts him at 7 years old. If he's 2, that puts him at 8 years old. I mean, he's just a little kid is all he is. And so he needs all the protection. I mean, you'd want to do that for a king anyway. But you want to give all the protection you possibly can. He's the one hope left of the seed of David for Israel. Verse 9, so the captains of the hundreds did according to all that Jehoiada the priest commanded. Each of them took his men who were to be on duty on the Sabbath with those who were going off duty on the Sabbath, and came to Jehoiada the priest. And the priest gave the captains of hundreds the spears and shields which had belonged to King David, that were in the temple of the Lord. And so all of these who are on duty are used, and all of those who are off duty stay on the clock. They don't go home. It's all hands on deck for this operation. And so the priest hands out to all these captains spears and shields that had belonged to the man to whom they're still true, even though he's gone on, of course, many years back, but to his seed line that were in the temple of the Lord. Then the escorts stood, every man with his weapons in his hand, all around the king, from the right side of the temple to the left side of the temple, by the altar and the house. And they brought out the king's son and put the crown on him and gave him the testimony, the law. And they made him king, and anointed him, and they clapped their hands together and said, "Long live the king!" Celebration. Now this creates quite the commotion, doesn't it? That's pretty bold, if you think about it. Very defiant. There is a sitting ruler in Israel. It's the queen mother who's been in charge for a full 6, now into the 7th year. And you march out this guy who's a part of the bloodline when she's tried to eradicate it, and you slide the beautiful shiny thing on top of his head. That alone is enough for your head to be gone, number 1. And then number 2, you create this great commotion. Yeah, we have a king! Long live the king! What sense does that make? Now all their heads are going to be gone, you would think. Why would they create such a commotion? Oh, they've waited for 7 long years. Roy, I don't think that's an accident, that it's 7 years, the number of perfection. They wait until the time is perfect, divinely perfect. God chose that number of perfection, 7. And so they wait to the perfect time, and then they create the commotion, and they want everyone to know who the ruler in Israel is. Clap their hands and they say, "Long live the king." They don't mention anything about the life of the queen being extended, do they? What do you think that might insinuate? Verse 13. Now when Athaliah heard the noise of the escorts and the people, I think they're trying to create this commotion so that the queen herself hears. Notice the reaction of the queen. When she heard the noise of the escorts and the people, she came to the people in the temple of the Lord. When she looked, there was the king standing by a pillar, according to custom. Apparently in Israel, when there's the coronation of a new king, he's taken out by this pillar, and you see this little boy, find out his exact age here in a little while, we find this little boy, maybe 7, 8 years old, and standing there with a crown on his head, and her blood begins to boil. Oh, they knew she would have this reaction. And she sees the leaders and the trumpeters that are beside the king. So it's not just a little pocket, but it's like everyone's on board with this. This isn't right. So all the people of the land were rejoicing and blowing trumpets. Everyone says, "Yeah, we finally have a ruler." "Whoa, whoa, whoa," she said. "Wait a minute. Treason, treason. No, I'm your ruler. I'm your queen. You don't have a king." And Jehoiada the priest commanded the captains of the hundreds, the officers of the army, and said to them, "Take her outside under the guard, and slay with the sword whoever follows her." You think there were a lot of people that really wanted to follow this woman anyway? If there were before, I seriously doubt there were very many after this order. They're probably like, "Okay, this is my get out of jail free card. I choose that one. I want to use it at this moment." Anyway, so they seized her, and she went by way of the horse's entrance. How fitting. She goes the path of an animal. She's lived like an animal, and she's about to die like an animal. So they seized her, and she went by the way of the horse's entrance into the king's house, and there she was killed. Jehoiada had told them, "Hey, take her outside. Don't kill her in the temple of the Lord." And I think that's probably a couple of reasons. One, just the general uncleanness of it anyway, but as well, too, her blood does not deserve to be shed. The kind of blood that you bring into the house of the Lord is innocent blood, and that's anything but hers. So verse 17, "Then Jehoiada made a covenant between the Lord, the king, and the people, that they should be the Lord's people, and also between the king and the people. And all the people," now again, I realize this isn't a situation where they've voted their leader necessarily, but this is the one that they want. And it's nice that it seems at least they might have a little say-so in government once again. So the covenant is made between the king and the people, that they should be the Lord's people, and also between the king and the people. And all the people of the land went to the temple of Baal that had been set up. This is in the city of Jerusalem. Of course, what very important place is found in the city of Jerusalem for the Jews? Southern Kingdom. What very important place to the Jews? What structure? The temple, right? So we find out that under the reign of this king, it follows all the ways of Ahab and Ahab's house. There's been a temple, apparently, that's been constructed in the holy city of Jerusalem. And while she's not so dumb as to try to destroy the temple of God, she creates this competition for God and His temple. And so there's this temple that's been constructed in the holy city where only the worship of Yahweh is to take place. And all the people of the land, in accord with this agreement, went to the temple of Baal and tore it down. They thoroughly broke in pieces its altars and images, and killed Matan, the priest of Baal, before the altars. And the priest appointed officers over the house of the Lord. So now there's only one house of worship, once again, as it should be, in Judah. Then he took the captains of hundreds, the bodyguards, the escorts, and all the people of the land, and they brought the king down from the house of the Lord. They make sure nothing happens to this prized blood of this young man, and went by the way of the gate of the escorts to the king's house. Then he sat on the throne of the kings. Who would like to tell us our memory verse here as we close? Chapter 11, verse 20. Roy, please do. Sound familiar at all? No one sad. And this is a time of rejoicing. Thank you, God, that someone has died. Now, that's awful, isn't it? When normally it doesn't happen in any land, even if you're not extremely fond of a ruler, but when you have a total tyrant who's nothing but a thief and a murderer and is treasonous and is anti-God, you hope it never have to come to that. But if that's what it takes to get the land and the people back on track and to save the nation, that's a positive thing. And that's what the people are experiencing right now. Here's what we're told in verse 21. Joash was 7 years old when he became king. Now remember, this happens. He's been hidden away for 6 years. Bless you. So that must mean that he's 1 year old when his life is preserved. Do you think God has a little bit of power and some oversight in what takes place, not only in his prized nation of Judah back when, but as well in all the nations of the world today? Let's never cease to pray for our country, never stop praying for the countries of the world and for God's intervention to take place. Listen, when things get and they look really dark, who's still in control? And sometimes he allows spans of 6 years and 7 years and 20 years and 30 years to give a little punishment, okay? But also he listens when his people cry out to them. And praise be to God who still cares and is in control of all things across the world. We'll close on this. I want to revisit the thought to which we led in our study. So is this a cause for celebration in Israel? It's a milestone achievement for the society. The First Lady has been put in charge. Now hear me out on this. It wasn't a cause for rejoice simply on the gender of this person. If at any point, whether in our country or around the world, we start celebrating a leader being put in place only because of gender or only because of age, only because of color, we don't understand what's a cause for celebration in our nation and the world. What's a cause for celebration is when there's a leader who respects God and who wants to take a nation down a course that will show respect for the Lord, regardless of gender, regardless of age, regardless of color or anything else like it. Now, we had someone who was of age, right? We'd think, well, that's a good thing. You have someone who may be 40, 50 years old. Well, this guy who's 7 years old is infinitely better than her. I'm not saying that's ideal, but it's a whole lot better than what they had. Celebration for a culture shouldn't be on the basis of superficial things, but as Dr. King Jr. once put it, on the content of a person's character. All right, any other thoughts as we close from what we studied today from chapter 11 and the Sword of Jehoiada, the priest of God? All right, so for next time, if you will, please read chapter 12. We're going to try to cover all of that, and it's only 21 verses, about like today, not too bad. We're going to cross over into chapter 13 and look at the first 9 verses there. So it's all of 12 and the first 9 verses of chapter 13. Our memory work will be chapter 13, verse 4. 13:4. Does God care when his people are being oppressed? That'll be the topic of conversation next week. Thanks.